for the Americans in the room, may I say Happy Liberation Day. We're going to get to trade a little bit later. Now, as he just said, we're here to talk about China. And China is racing ahead in the global AV game, not just in R&D, but in real-world deployment. Cities like Beijing and Wuhan have fully driverless robotaxis on the road. The estimated market size by 2033 is 170 billion for the AV in China. Now, we have giants like Baidu and startups like Pony.ai that are all scaling fast. I'm sure that many of you in this room are watching the sector closely, but with momentum comes trade-offs. How do you balance innovation with cost and safety? What happens when the regulatory environment changes? And above all, will China's approach to autonomous driving become the global standard, as it has with electric vehicles? Or will commercialization be the stumbling block? We will get into all of these topics today. Let's start with setting the scene a little bit for those who are not as in the know as our panelists. Helen, let me start with you. What is the portrait of Chinese AV in 2025? There's been a lot of growth in the last few years.
Yeah, I think in 2025, all the operation in Apollo is going in February, starting all driverless. And we have major upgrade for the technology. So in everywhere you go, all the operation is driverless. And also we accumulate more than 10 million paid ride. And we also accomplished close to 150 million kilometers autonomous driving mileage, which is equivalent to 92 million miles.
Excellent. Now, Zion, Pony.ai is not just doing robotaxis, but robo-trucking. And the last time we spoke, you told me that you thought the West misunderstands the vibrancy and the speed of the Chinese sector. What is the West not seeing?
I think in general, there's a misperception that China simply copies the best technology out of the West. And I think it's better to think of it as China has been on this industrialization path. So, and as you're industrializing, you're obviously going to be picking the best things you're seeing and then building them in-house. So you're going to be, but that building process it's not like software. You're just not copy pasting. You're spending your time with your engineers learning. And then once you reach a stage in which you're at parity, then you begin building on top of that. You begin innovating, and you have this just very vibrant culture and very competitive culture of building things. I mean, our iPhones are built in China, so it shouldn't surprise people that Huawei has amazing phones, that Xiaomi has amazing phones, that there are 5 or 6 other companies that have phones that are absolute competitors. And we don't see a lot of that here in the West, especially in the U.S., in part because of regulatory controls that limit the ability of some of this technology to spread outside of China. But the Chinese market itself is so massive that companies can really build and fill in that gap. And in the autonomous vehicle space, there's really no exception. Pony was founded in Fremont, California. We spent our initial couple of years really building our technology in the United States with a small office in China. But the Chinese government has had a true all-of-government approach to really embracing the adoption of technologies such as autonomous driving. And where in the U.S. you really have a fragmented approach and regulations, in China the regulations are both very clear where you can go, but more importantly, we'll probably get into this, the regulators are very, very helpful, for lack of a better word, in ensuring that companies like Pony can find markets to build in. So initially what we used to see is that autonomous technology would be allowed in ODDs that were around away from city centers for the most part. But those, of course, are not the most profitable to do actually commercial work. But over the last 2 years, Pony, Baidu, and several other companies in China have begun getting permits as the regulators see that our technology is mature to do those high value routes from a city center to an airport, from a train station into large commercial areas. Which gives you the ability to, as you're expanding your product, also really commercialize it and learn that commercialization stuff, because at the end of the day, we're businesses. So it's not simply enough to have a technology that works. We have to understand how to commercialize that technology. And the regulators have been incredibly helpful in China in allowing us to expand and explore those opportunities.
So I want to follow up on that. But Sophia, let me bring you in here because you are fresh off the plane. You still have some jet lag from your most recent trip. And unlike perhaps most of us, you've ridden in both American and Chinese robotaxis. How do they compare?
I think it's, as far as I would say, if I break down the robotaxi experience on like a tier list, I would say in general, like if you go from like an S tier to like an F tier, well, thankfully nobody's in F tier. But maybe if I was to take like a global view of what the space looks like as a rider, I would say I'm more comfortable with the control experience on like a Waymo. I think it's very good. I don't really have any complaints. But honestly, like Apollo Go is very not far behind. I think they're just right there. They're very close to like being in the S tier. But as a rider, the 6th generation Apollo Go cars are very, very comfortable. I mean, you have, massaging seats, you have heated seats, and everything is hands-free. You just have to refer to the assistant in the car and it'll answer you whatever your request might be. So from a comfort perspective, the cars are very, very impressive. And then of course you have, I was able to ride Pony.ai in Shenzhen, and I was able to also try out WeRide, which is over in I think the Guangzhou area. And they're not far behind. I mean, WeRide has, unfortunately, the one that I was in had a safety driver in it who basically told me not to film, but, the ride was also fairly calm, and, there wasn't too much to really knock them on. And Pony, of course, is in the middle of Shenzhen where it's very hectic, and there's a lot of traffic, and it was very confident. So it's sort of like you pick and choose your experience. And, I think for those, they're probably somewhere in like the B tier, I would say. But again, very, very close to being in any of the higher tiers.
I want to follow up on something you mentioned because, Helen, you lead innovation at China's biggest player, which is Baidu. And as we heard from Vishay earlier today, the market matters, the city matters, population matters. And in your opinion, the population density that happens in places like Beijing and Wuhan requires a fundamentally different approach than you might have to build somewhere with less density and fewer delivery drivers and everything that goes into a Chinese street scene. So tell us about what it takes to get a Chinese AV or Apollo Go in your case. How do you deal with that number of variables from a technical perspective?
That's a really, really good point. I think that typically, in the early stage, you develop technology, right? Once the technology breaks through from 0 to 1, then now you're starting to do the commercialization, high commercialization, and the market shifted everything. So particularly you mentioned about in China, the population densities, like Wuhan region, were covered about 3,000 kilometer squares, which is close to 1,200 kilo square miles. So when you can build square miles, so you can see that's large area and also cover about 9 million populations. So with that, and also with the market shaping in China, the robotaxi, like Didi, if you call a taxi driver in China, the cost roughly about in the major city is about 2.6 yuan per kilometer. The cost is really low. So all that shape up as a technology weapon we have to deliver, not on two fronts. So one front, we need to make sure, exactly mentioned about how you can make sure your technology readiness for this very complex city or urban area driving experience. Another thing, how you can make sure your cost of the product has to be reasonable to be able to make UE positive. You cannot making every mile or kilometer you drive and it's losing money. You have to make it positive. With all those dimensions, what is putting out together, so which is quite a tough task. But on the other hand, you develop technology, you make sure it have to be commercialized and to be made. You need to generate revenue. You need to have a gross profit positive. Then eventually you have to have net profit. With all those in mind, so that's actually, as Sophie mentioned about the sixth generation, we're very proud of the sixth generation. So we achieved about below $30,000 of dollars per vehicle, include everything, include the electrical vehicle, including the whole autonomous driving suite, all the sensors and computation systems. And on top of that technology, I think it's this way, if you grow up in a countryside, then you have a certain skill set you have to develop, right? How to farming, how to do the agriculture. But you grow up in city, you have a city smart. So similar thing, we grew up in the China market. So the things, when we develop things, we have to do a lot of, hard to handle the situations. So it's the AI technology with the recent advancement. We have ADFM, called Autonomous Driving Foundation Model. With this built in, we'll be able to deliver this capability, end-to-end capability to deliver using the data-driven technology to make the flying wheel going, and we'll be able to absorbing all those road scenarios. So which is the most challenging thing is still the corner cases. And with the enlarger for the model of iterations, so many generation iterations, we'll be able to achieve this what we can achieve. So we can do this 24 hours and 7 days operation in Wuhan region, and we have more than 100,000 kilometers daily for the driverless ride. So with all those together, I think we'll have more of the feedback from our exactly consumer users and then feedback to the system. And back to the Sophie's point, actually, Sophia's point, it was part of the feature we think about when we commercialize it, how we can make our vehicle to be consumer noticeable. So one for the couple area we look at these things, we want to make sure, most people talk about the safety. Safety, I consider about two aspects. One safety is the safety in the public road. So you are safer than human driver. And I have personal experience lost, loved ones. So through this kind of situation, I know how hard most people just calculate from the dollar point of view, what is your economical creating the hardship through the traffic accident, the fatality, everything. But another thing is emotional. It's really, really big thing for the family, whoever love their loved ones. I think that's actually is priceless. You couldn't even calculate this. With all those in mind, I think, so that's one side safety, which is human error typically causing about more than 90% of the traffic accident. So if with machine and AI technology, we can completely reduce that 100%. So with that, then you at least have 10x of earning with the safety. So even the publicity has a lot of like we've been all the autonomous driving technology been putting on the spotlight for the development. People look at it, but on the other hand, 10x is still a significant amount. You're going to save a lot of family without this grief and sorrow they have to go through. Another safety I will continue with this safety. The safety is you inside the car. You don't worry the robbery. You don't worry any other criminal activity can be potential happen to you. And because of that reason, we actually request by the Chinese government to providing this service for the late night female workers. Make sure they can ride on the autonomous driving vehicles so they will be safe from their workplace to home. So typically in those late night region time, it can be very vulnerable to be certain things to be happen. And with their latest data from the police and department, they feel this way they help them to preventing certain crime and also helping them. That's why we end up with, so we want to make sure the female worker feel like a queen. So we added the massage and heated massage chair for them. So when they go home at midnight, so they can get massaged while riding the vehicles, and then they go home, then they can just enjoy a nice sleep and then be very energetic tomorrow morning and back up to work. So that's kind of the feature come up. They actually do a lot of UI, user interface study, and they found out that one very attractive. Apparently, Sophia, try it out and very noticeable for the features for the vehicle. And so besides that one, we also actually trying to be asked to providing the service for the disabilities and elderly. Yeah. So those, I think, bring the equality to all the citizens. That's a very good point, which is, I think that's what is the mobility really bring to the, the overall, to all the consumer. So they can be able to reach from one point to next point. Yeah.
It's a big vision. Now, Sophia, did you feel like a queen with your massage chair?
Oh, yeah.
User feedback.
The massage is fantastic. Okay, so just to sort of lay it out for everybody, there is the heated seats feature, which you can control via voice. There is the massaging seats feature, which actually features, I think, 3 different massage patterns. And one of them is called like catwalk, which is supposed to emulate like a cat walking on your back. There is actually entire modes that you can switch the car into. Like there's like a rest mode and there's a sleep mode, which reclines your seat like all the way back. And it also like lowers the volume of the music, and it like turns on ambient lighting. I mean, my God. Like if you want to sleep in this thing for like an hour, it's very easy to do.
All of this for under $30,000 US to make. And now the hallmarks of Chinese technology are, of course, lower manufacturing costs and consumer affordability. So Zion, let me bring you in here. There's often a trade-off between cost and safety. How is it possible to have both?
Well, so one, it's very important for people to understand that your costs of manufacturing are just so much lower in China, and that's not simply because workers cost less. It's China leads in industrial automation. There are more industrial robots in Chinese factories. I think I saw a statistic now that is more than everywhere else in the world combined. If not, it's very close. It definitely laps any individual industrialized nation, including the U.S., but by several orders of magnitude. So your costs are lower. It's a very competitive situation, and the regulatory environment is very different. Basically, in automotive, there are 3 main regulatory environments. There's, of course, the U.S. where we are, where there's the FMVSS, and then trucking is regulated slightly differently, but it's self-certification. Your OEM and then your manufacturers that are sort of adding on to vehicles, they self-certify that the end product complies with the rules. In Europe, you use a technical service provider that certifies for you, and different certification authorities will judge things a little bit differently, and there is a bit of a game. Tesla, sorry, and who you choose. I'm not trying to pick on Tesla too much here, because everyone does play that game in Europe. They choose who their technical service provider is, and they'll have certain peculiarities of what they check, what they don't. In China, the government directly, especially in autonomous vehicles, directly manages your system. And I'll just high level what happens. Every large city has its own peculiarities because the national government has allowed each local transportation authority to come up with its own slight variations on the rules. But generally it works. That first you have to prove your technology is safe by doing some kind of off-road testing. Then you can get a permit to test with a safety driver behind the wheel. And then Beijing, Guangzhou specifically, then they make you basically like a driver learner permit in the US. You have a brake pedal, and then the driver sits in the passenger seat with the brake pedal and the computer, but is not behind the driver's wheel. And then when it's judged safe enough, and I'll get to that in a second, then you have someone in the car, usually they're in the back seat with computer controls, but no controls of the physical controls of the vehicle. And only when all that is allowed, then you can take the driver out. And then you have to have one-to-one, so you have a person sitting in a virtual center where they can virtually take over if there's a problem with the vehicle, and the vehicle is driving now full autonomous with one overseer. And then they can add, we just announced that we've received a permit in Shenzhen where we can do up to one observer for up to 15 vehicles. So we're pretty confident in our technology. But how the government judges that your technology is safe is they look, of course, at actual incidents where you actually hit something, but they also are looking at disengagements in pretty much everywhere in the U.S. and a lot of European test permits. The requirement is that you have to tell the government. In California, of course, you tell them annually. In other places, you tell them only if there's a significant incident. In Europe, it's oftentimes once a month or once every 2 weeks. In China, you actually have a black box. that you then submit to the government. So the government, they're none of those sort of games that are sometimes played by certain manufacturers of technology where that didn't really count as a disengagement because the technology isn't mature enough to have seen that anyway, so we're not going to report that. That's every disengagement is counted. And if you want the government to disregard this because, the driver was getting out of the vehicle, so that shouldn't be counted as disengagement, then you have to submit along with your black box. These are the 3 things or 5 things why we disengage that we don't think the regulator should count as a disengagement. And what that does is, I feel with anyone, when you're checking their work, it, especially in real time, it really does drive a safety culture in a very particular way, which I think is a good way, and also drives the development of the technology of really ensuring that when you're about to move to the next step, that you're really confident that you are ready for that next step.
Now, a big piece of commercialization for all AV, in addition to the safety records and safety checks you're describing, is consumer adoption, which is really trust. And we've heard a lot about trust today. Sophia, you've been on the ground quite a bit. What are the messages or strategies that are resonating with Chinese consumers that are getting them to try these cars and keep riding in them?
Yeah, I think a lot of what resonates with the consumers is it's like you have the, I guess, Uber equivalent in China, so Didi, right? It's basically just the same as Uber. It's ride hailing. A lot of people don't necessarily love having to take Didi, especially when, it's the same problems with Uber here. It's like you don't really know who you're getting. You don't know what car you're getting. You don't know how the environment's going to be. And so a lot of AV companies are pushing the message that, look, this is the car you're going to get. It's clean, it's safe. We know exactly how it's going to drive. We have a great safety record. So there's that side of it. And then the other side is like consumers, especially like the female demographic, for example, they don't want to get in just any car with anybody. And so the other part, I think, like Helen highlighted earlier, is that you have the opportunity to just have the car to yourself. There's no other dangers in the car, and it's like a very private experience, and you can have a very comfortable ride, maybe even get massaged on your way, and that really resonates with like the other half of the consumer market. So, and then like there's also sort of like the silly namings, right? So I know in English it sounds like pretty serious, like Apollo Go, like who's Apollo and where are they going? And then Pony, but actually, if you look at the Chinese names, they're very, very cute. So, for example, Apollo Go in China is 萝卜快跑, which means like carrot running fast, right? That's very cute, but it doesn't translate over to English. Pony in China, it's 小马思情, which basically it's like little horse goes traveling, but like again, that doesn't translate over to to English, but that really highlights the Chinese consumer that these are, cutesy services and they've got, cute little mascots, and that really resonates with the Chinese consumer.
You did tell me that when, let's say, an Apollo Go car picks someone up at the wrong spot, they have another name for it.
Oh, yeah. So I think some consumers in China, I think especially around like the previous vehicles, where maybe they were not so aware of like where they were going to pick up and drop off, they would say something like they would call them like 笨萝卜, which is like silly rabbit, or like 傻萝卜, which is like, stupid rabbit. And I'm sorry to like, sort of bring it up, but I think it's relevant because behavior also matters to other people, right? On the road, it's not just the person riding, it's also like the person who has to follow and be in traffic with these autonomous cars. And so like a lot of drivers in China also say that. It's like, oh, it's 那个是傻萝卜, oh, that's a silly rabbit or a silly carrot. And it's sort of like in like the the common netizen vocabulary is like, oh, it's one of them again. But actually I think on the whole, people are sort of warming up to it, and it's very much like the novelty going down. You see them in traffic, it's not so wild or scary anymore. And of course, like, you know, during my rides, people also still take pictures or whatever, and you sort of just wave at them, and then they go like, oh shoot, they saw, let me put my camera down. But yeah, I mean, it's really about like the comfort, the cute messaging. You know, the product has to look not like a science experiment also.
Excellent. And our last question then I think will go to you, Sue. Trust, of course, matters as well on an international level. And all companies are learning to navigate a new world of trade restrictions and supply chain impact and all sorts of uncertainty that didn't exist even a few years ago. Helen, how does Baidu navigate that uncertainty?
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I add a couple on to the Sophia's comments. So a couple of things. I think that's really good. At Baidu we actually listen all the voice from the consumer. I think those comments really good. But I want one little bit pitch of there. The reason is this way. So as a large corporation, you operating all the operation for driverless of the service. Actually, we have to follow the regulations strictly. The consumer habit to calling the robot taxi with a human driver, they sometimes the pickup location is not allowed. But they didn't what they're aware. But with the flexibility, they can do it. But as a company develop this technology and follow all the regulation from the government set up, then you have to be able. You cannot disagree with that. That's why sometimes the location is nearby, but not exactly the location they picked. So about it. Another thing I think actually is really good. Sophia mentioned about we can deliver the service to the disabilities. So she already mentioned about. I think this is a good point. Actually, the whole vehicle is voice recognition. Everything you do is through the voice in active. Because if you have disability, you may not be able to touch or push. If you're blindsided, then you couldn't. So, and also we also have Bluetooth enabled automatic open door. So as long as the cell phone with you, you will close the vehicle, it will open the door. So couple of the features, that's only couple list. More than that, to for example, disable, we have to be really quick. So back to your point about the uncertainty. I think this is, we live in a very dynamic, changing of the technology world. With the AI advancement so fast and so quickly, actually, you asked me, before the stage, I was, this is really my opinion. Besides all those uncertainty about the trade deficit, everything, and I think number one really big challenge is technology-wide. Is the development technology advancement is so fast. Now we have to tracking the technology daily. Those things actually is the most unpredictable factor we have to go through, and we have to develop our technology quickly. Even we in this field for such a long time, we understand the autonomous driving, we understand driverless, we understand the AI technology. But even though technology for the development advancement is so quickly, so I think that's one is we want to make sure we can evolving quickly. Yeah.
Right. Last word, Zion. What advice do you have for the other startups in this room as they navigate a world of uncertainty?
I guess my actual only advice is you kind of have to run your own race. You have to believe that you've built a team and you have a technical edge in what you believe you're doing and your market, and then just focus on that. I think that's probably, that advice probably goes and scales across all technical verticals. We're in a very unique environment geopolitically, and that means they're both a lot of risks, but there are also a lot of benefits in the area, in the sort of spaces in those risks. And historically, great tech tends to win out, but it's great tech built combined with a great business plan. So you do have to have both, and then once you have that, run your race, and good things tend to follow.
Good note to end on. Thank you very much to our speakers.